This grebe is a loud bird compared to the other grebes. The Western grebe and Clark's grebe are larger grebes. Western grebe is 51 to 61 centimeters. The Clark grebe is 52 to 58 centimeters. They're found in the western regions of North America. I've not actually seen a Clark's grebe in Alberta yet, because it's found mostly just in the southeast portion of the province. I am planning a trip to the southern part of the province, so if anyone can give me ideas where I might find this grebe, I would really appreciate it. The Clark's grebe, as you can see, has the black that's on the top of its head does not cover the eye, unlike the Western grebe where the black on the head does cover the eye. The Western grebe has a greenish yellow bill, while the Clark's grebe has an orangish yellow bill. The courtship display of the Western grebe and Clark's grebe is one of the most elaborate rituals in the Alberta bird world, and it's often featured on nature documentaries like National Geographic. It's something I would really like to see. This is a picture of the Western grebes I saw at Frank Lake. Okay, here's a range. Here shows the range for grebes from the Peterson Field Guide. I find it interesting to look at the range for these different grebes, because in our world, as I said, the redneck grebe is probably the one that you see most commonly. But when I look at the map here, it says the redneck grebe is an uncommon bird. So I guess how we experience grebes compared to how they're represented in North America is different. Okay, maybe you might think it's boring to talk about the anatomy of the grebe, but the feet of a grebe and there is the thing that makes it most distinct. Okay, so as I mentioned, grebes are basically small to medium in size, usually 9 inches to 16 inches. They resemble loons in a lot of ways, and they have many aquatic habits of a loon, but surprisingly, molecularly, grebes are most related to the flamingo. The feet of a grebe is very important. It's a very distinctive characteristic. Grebes do not have webbed feet like ducks, swans, or geese, or loons, but instead they have big feet with broad lobed toes and flat nails. The hind toe is also a small lobe. Recent experimental work has shown that these lobes work like the hydrofoil blades of a propeller. They swim by simultaneously spreading out the feet and bringing them inward, with the webbing expanding to produce the forward thrust in much the same way as a frog does. Because of this, grebes are excellent swimmers and divers. Of course, their wings also play a large role in their speedy swimming and diving. And when flying, grebes use their trailing feet sort of as rudders. Because they have short tail feathers, their feet stick way out when they're flying. The foot placement of a grebe, sorry, I'm getting ahead here on my pictures. The foot placement of the grebe is at the very back of their body. So the name for grebe is podiceps, which means feet placed far back on the body. I might ask you that question later, so you better hope that you remember that. So podiceps means rump foot. So because grebes have their feet placed so far back on their body, they cannot walk very well on land, and they very rarely are seen on land. Even trying to stand on the nests, I noted that they were very awkward, kind of falling forward. So grebes respond to danger by diving rather than flying. As an example of their diving abilities, the horned grebe can stay underwater for up to 3 minutes and travel 150 to 200 meters. So the speed at which the grebes can submerge has earned them such names as water witch and hell diver. So they can stay underwater for 3 minutes, yeah. They can run for a short distance, but they're prone to falling over, like I said, because their feet are placed so far back on their body. The personalities of the grebe are quite varied. As seen in this picture, the redneck grebe is very gregarious kind of bird. This pie-billed grebe on the right is much more solitary and sulking in personality. Grebes, though, are much less wary than ducks. And Western grebes are very social and they nest in colonies. Okay, let's talk about the plumage of the grebe. As you can see in this picture, grebes have narrow wings and reduced tail feathers and very satiny breast feathers. They also have unusual plumage that is dense and waterproof. So the underside of the feathers are at right angles to the skin. So they stick straight out to begin with, and then they curl in at the tip. So by exhaling and pressing their feathers against their body, grebes can adjust their buoyancy. And if they press hard enough, they can sink quietly below the surface. Often, grebes swim low in the water with just their head and neck exposed. Okay, let's talk about the diet of grebes. Grebes' diets are made up mostly of animal matter. They dive to get food using a short forward arching spring. That's how they dive. They sort of arch into the water. They use their wings to propel themselves underwater in order to get the food of freshwater insects and crustaceans. Unlike many other birds, unlike other birds that are identified by having the same shape of beak, grebes each have very different shapes of beaks. So that will never be a way to identify a grebe by looking at the shape of their beak. The Western grebe and Clark's grebe, as you see on the left picture, have very long pointy beaks and they tend to eat fish. And here you can see they're feeding the fish to their young ones. The horned and redneck grebes have a more varied diet. On the right is a young horned grebe. It appears to be eating a dragonfly. So the horned and redneck grebes forage among plants, mainly for small crustaceans and insects, but also they eat leeches, tadpoles, salamanders, amphibians, and some plant material. And in the winter, mollusks, crustaceans, and fish. And the eared grebe feeds on small invertebrates. Here's the eared grebe. And the pie-billed grebe, as you see on the right, has a very thick beak, as I mentioned earlier, and it eats heavy-bodied crustaceans. One very unusual characteristic of grebes, I think is unusual, is that when preening, the grebes eat their own feathers, usually just the little kind of downy feathers. I've seen them pick them out of the water and feed them also to their young. So the function of the feathers, of this behavior, of eating feathers, of this behavior is uncertain, but it's believed to assist with pellet formation and to reduce their vulnerability to gastric parasites and or to slow the passage of food to give more nutrients and or to act as a plug to filter or hold fish bones in the stomach until they can be digested. So periodically they disgorge the pellets. So monomorphic appearance. So basically, the male and female grebe looks the same. The male may be slightly larger, maybe slightly more dramatically colored, but generally they're very hard to tell apart. So in this way, they're very different than ducks, who, as you may know, all the different kinds of ducks have a very distinct male and female appearance. The coloration of grebes, I talked about this already several times, but I'm going to repeat it over and over. As you can see here, they're in their fall plumage. During breeding season, or this is their breeding plumage. During breeding time, they have very striking chestnut markings on their head, chestnut colored markings. And like other grebes, the horned grebe has a golden patch of feathers behind the eyes that can be raised or lowered to give the appearance of horns. The middle one shows kind of the horns on the horned grebe and on the right side. The other one is eared grebe. Here again is the horns on the horned grebe, especially when they're excited, but even just when they're dry. Grebes, I find, are a little bit difficult to photograph when they're in the water because they can often look very wet and soggy. And here's some pictures of them looking wet and soggy, and they make very shiny photos. And here's the same horned grebe that you just saw in the fall, in non-breeding season, in very plain colors with whites and, you know, sort of brown tones. So, a sleeping or resting horned grebe often puts its neck on its back with its head off to one side, but still facing forward. And it keeps one foot tucked up under a wing and uses the other one to maneuver in the water. Having one foot up under a wing makes it float with a high side and a low side. On the right there is a picture of the Western grebe. It's doing something that is called foot shipping. So Western grebes and Clark grebes have a unique behavior that they do to control their body temperature. They stick one foot back behind them, shake the water off, and then place it under their wing to keep it warm and to prevent heat loss. But sometimes on sunny days, they leave their foot on their back or out dangling to absorb the heat from the sun. And this behavior is called foot shipping. I saw this, I got this photo actually in Saskatchewan at my friend's cottage. And I saw it quite often, this foot shipping. It was a common behavior. Okay, one of the most interesting traits of grebes is their courtship ceremonies. In the spring and summer, most once again, the most important thing during courtship is their dramatic coloring, right? These blacks and golden colors that most of them have. Of course, the Western grebe and Clark's grebe are not colored like that, but the other grebes are. Grebes have elaborate courtships rituals. They mate for life, but they also continue doing these courtship ceremonies as a way to bond and strengthen their relationship. Some of the things they do for courtship is ritualized preening, head shaking, diving, and weed carrying. Western grebes, as you see in the left picture, are known for their rapid water treading with the body in nearly a vertical position, sort of like synchronized dancing or doing ballet on water or running across the surface of water. Clark grebes and Western grebes also do this similar kind of courtship behavior. Here you can see the eared grebe sort of standing up in the water. Sorry, just lost my place here. Clark grebes and Western grebes also do courtship feeding, where one bird feeds the other. And in both species, it's the male that feeds the female. The courtship display here of this eared grebe, the male and female may swim side by side while turning their heads back and forth and calling loudly. They also face each other while rearing up out of the water and turning their heads from side to side. And at the climax of their display, the pair may rear up to a vertical position, rush across the surface of the water side by side, just like the Western grebes do. Horned grebes also do posturing, rising up out of the water to a vertical position with their head feathers raised fully. And then they dive together, come up with bits of weeds carried in their bills, and then rush along the water side by side, carrying these weeds. In the courtship of more secretive species like the pie-billed grebe, they do less sort of display and more vocalizations in their courtship behavior. These courtship displays may be combined into sort of a complex ceremony. In nearly all courtship ceremonies, the role of the sexes are interchangeable. And like I said earlier, there are videos and movies capturing these rituals, such as the spectacular synchronized dancing on water display of the courtship of the Clark's grebe from Oregon, USA, shown on the BBC documentary Life, narrated by Sir David Attenborough. And some of this picture on the left here, I took from Birds of Canada, the second edition by David M. Bird. Now, I personally have never seen these elaborate courtship rituals. And I would love to hear from any of you, maybe at the end of this presentation, what your experience has been, if you've been able to observe this behavior, and also like where near Edmonton you might possibly be able to see it. I know I've read about someone who went to Frank Lake and they were behind the blind there and they were able to observe the Western grebes. And also I think the eared grebes are there. So, you know, that might be one place that we could observe this, but I feel like this is something that happens mostly like in early May. So our opportunity is probably limited. We got to get on it. Probably what got me first interested or entertained by the grebes was watching them make a nest. They build the most wet, cryptic, floating vegetative nests near the shore on slow-moving bodies of water like ponds and lakes and rivers. And they anchor these nests to some kind of emerging plant like bulrushes, where they're protected from predators of hawks and osprey. And these soggy nests are made of reeds and green wet plant material from under the water. And in it, they lay 3 to 8 chalky white eggs. So I was just really quite surprised that, look at the top right corner, like how wet and soggy the nests were, and that those eggs could survive in that wet, soggy nest. Anyway, when I watched the grebes, I noticed they took turns sitting on the eggs and they worked as a team. So when one got off the nest, another one would get on. And when an incubating parent is frightened off the nest, it frequently attempts to cover up the eggs with this soggy green nest material And by the end of incubation period, which is usually like 3 to 4 weeks, the eggs are usually strongly stained. I read about something called the Care-soliciting Signal that sounded like some interesting research that was done fairly recently. So with eared grebes, there is an amazing communication that occurs between the unhatched chicks and the eared grebes and their incubating adults through a vocalization called the Care-soliciting Signal. So in the last few days before the grebes hatch, a faint peeping sound from the eggs prompts the adult eared grebe to turn the eggs more often, build up the nest mound, bring food to the nest, and spend more time incubating. Now let's talk about the young. They're so adorable. As you see on the right-hand side, they're very cute little birds. In most cases, once the eggs are hatched, and the adult will desert the nest and then just carry the babies on their back swimming in the water. But because the eggs seem to be laid not all at once, but maybe every other day, it can take several days before all the eggs are hatched. So there will be a period of time that the adult will be on the nest and have babies on her back and be sitting on eggs and have a baby in the water in front of her all at the same time, and then have her partner bringing food to them all. So it's endearing to see that both parents share in the nest building, incubation, and care of the young. On hatching, these downy young are marked with bold, longitudinal black and white stripes, although such stripes are rarely visible on the gray young of the western grebe or Clark's grebe. Remnants of the head stripes are carried over into the juvenile plumage. In addition to the stripes, the young have one or more bare spots on the crown, which color from pink to red when the young become excited. As in many grebe species, horned grebes usually spend the majority of their time on their parents' backs during the first 7 to 10 days, nestled in between their wings. And the chicks even go underwater on their backs. So as the parents dive for food, if the chick is on their back, the chick just stays there on their back. After about 10 days, each adult grebe will take half the brood and the family will part ways. So in summary, they lay 3 to 8 eggs every other day. They incubate for 23 to 24 days. They ride on their parents' back for a week. They brood for 9 days, and grebettes are fed for 14 days. And the chicks are independent by 21 to 25 days. And then they can fly by 41 to 50 days. As the horned grebe matures, the stripes on their faces gradually fade and their coloring becomes very plain brown and white. Here you can see that they're maturing and starting to swim on their own. And I even observed that the adult was forcibly flapping about, trying to shove them back off as they would try to climb back on. Here you can see them getting more duller in color, but still very cute. And becoming more independent with getting their own food. Okay, now I'm going to just go through the life cycle of the horned grebe family that I saw in Southwest Edmonton. These are photos I took, and I was able, of course, to see which date I took each photo so I can tell sort of the timeline of how things went. So on May 3rd to 9th, first of all, I did notice today that there are some grebes already here. So even though in this case, I started seeing them May 3rd to 9th, I see that there have been some reports of some grebes that are already have arrived in the Edmonton area. So that's good. So on May 3rd to 9th, this is in 2021, on May 3rd to 9th, I saw these grebes in their full mating plumage and partnered up and swimming on the pond. By May 10th to 16th, one evening I was out and they were frantically building their nests. It was very entertaining because as you see, like these two on the right, they were trying to like pass one another with big long sticks and things in their mouth and crashing into one another. And sometimes they would swim towards where they were making the nest and then turn around and go the other direction. And it seemed to me to be the most chaotic thing I'd ever watched. It was frantic. It produced very, very cryptic nests that I thought would just fall apart in 1 minute. And I don't know, you know, of course I was only there for a short time watching this, but it was very entertaining. May 17th. This is a day before there was a huge snowstorm. And I could see that as one grebe got off the nest and the other one was getting on, that there were 3 eggs. After the snowstorm, I went back the day after the snowstorm. I don't have the picture of this, but the nest was gone. It was like completely gone. It was a very heavy snowstorm. And I could see right where the nest was that in the water at the bottom, not very far down, was an egg. So I just sort of assumed that that was the end of that nest. But by May 24th, I saw there was a new nest nearby. And there were 5 eggs on that nest. So I just am thinking that they just continued laying more, quickly creating another nest and laying more eggs. I don't really know, but that was just so shocking to me. So if anyone can understand how this all happened, I mean, I guess there's a remote possibility I didn't notice this other nest before and there was a second nest there already, but it seemed to me this was a continuation of the same family because it was very close by. On June 20th to 22nd, I could see that there were still some eggs in the nest, but there was also some hatched babies. So this is the start of the life, the new babies. June 22nd, here they are sitting on their parents' backs or nearby in the water and being fed by the other adults. By June 25th, I think they're now off their nest. All of the babies have been born and now they're just riding on their parents' backs through the water. By June 29th, here you can see they're being shoved off and they're swimming on their own and following their parents around. By July 11th, they're starting to look more mature. The adults are looking less in their mating plumage. Obviously, this young one's finding its own food here by July 15th. By August 2nd, they're looking much less like a young one and much older, but very plain in color. I noticed on the right slide here, this was the grebe. I showed this picture before, but because I never see them in the fall. Of course, I don't see them in the winter because they migrate south, but this one I saw was around October, I think. Yeah, it was in October and it was looking, you know, it was obviously moved to a much larger lake, or it was on that large lake at Genesee Lake. And then also one of the things I observed was when the grebes were on the small pond, one day I went there early in the morning and there was a, what was it? There was a hawk, it was a Cooper's hawk, was in a tree, a short tree, right on the side of the pond, right above them. And I was shocked that none of the ducks noticed it was there, because I saw it right away, and they were right below. There were ducks and grebes there. And as I got out of the car, because I wasn't very far, the hawk quickly swooped down and tried to get one of them and then flew off. So it was very interesting to observe that. I remember that day thinking, who needs coffee when they can watch this at 7 in the morning? In the spring, I was just down in Florida, and I saw this horned grebe, which hasn't flown back yet, and it's starting to develop its mating plumage, right? It still hasn't developed full coloring yet. So that kind of gave me a glimpse of what they're like before they come back. But usually by the time they come back, I think they're into their plumage, full plumage. Oh. For the most part, grebes live in temperate regions, like in Canada, with distinct seasons, so they need to migrate for winter. And some species spend their non-breeding season on large lakes, bays, and open oceans or seacoasts. And they eat fish in salt water. So they switch over to going to the sea, and they eat saltwater fish. Horned grebes migrate a medium distance, singly, over land by night and along the coast by day. So they winter along the Pacific coast from Alaska to Mexico, or along the Atlantic coast from Nova Scotia to the Gulf Coast, and on large inland lakes such as the Great Lakes. Now I'd like to read to you something interesting about the migration of the eared grebe. This was, in my mind, so shocking, how very specific this is, and how one change to any one lake can probably eradicate the whole species of grebes, of the eared grebe. So the eared grebe, each spring and fall, makes an arduous, non-stop flight, hundreds of miles. In the early fall, more than 99% of the entire North American population of eared grebes gather in two places, Mono Lake and Great Salt Lake of Utah and California. So with more than 1 million birds at each lake, and they feast on brine shrimp, and all they do is eat shrimp to gain weight. Their entire focus shifts to processing food, and their digestive organs grow, and their flight muscles shrink to the point that they're flightless. When their weight has doubled with stored fat and the food supplies in the lake dwindle, they stop eating. Now the digestive organs shrink to 1/4 of their peak size, and they become non-functional. And then the grebes exercise their wings so that flight muscles grow in preparation for one big flight. The stakes are high since they are now unable to eat. Their flight muscles must get strong enough while they still have enough stored fat to make the flight. And they only have enough fuel for one attempt. So on some optimal evening in October, hundreds of thousands of birds are in the air together for their overnight nonstop flight over the desert to the Pacific Ocean, where they will spend their winter. Anyway, I thought that was pretty extreme, like so much eating, unable to fly, only one chance at flying, relying on these lakes to survive, to not, lose too much water or whatever it is. It just seems very, very dicey to me. Are grebes endangered? About 1/3 of the world's grebes are listed at various levels of conservation concerns. The biggest threats to their survival include habitat loss and degrading of breeding habitat due to agriculture practices and pesticides, and due to drought. The introduction of invasive predatory fish, oil spills, ingestion of plastics and lead, and entanglement in fishing nets are also a threat, but in my mind, these seem to be more of a threat in their winter months when they're down south on those bigger lakes or on the ocean. But I guess some of those things could be a threat here as well. As such, there are 3 species of grebes that have gone extinct. And in 2022, the government of Canada has set in place policy to monitor the Western grebes, as it's considered a species at risk due to the decline in numbers, as has been established by the Christmas bird counts of North America. I kind of looked at this report, which was like, you know, like hundreds of pages, I feel. And basically, after all of their, I mean, basically, they list all the things that need to be examined more closely to determine what the exact risks are, because they're still not really sure exactly the cause of the decline. So I want to finish my little presentation from a quote from that IMAX movie, Ducks Unlimited, Wings Over Water. As beautiful and important as the prairie pothole region is, it is among the most threatened ecosystems in North America. Up to 50% of wetlands in the prairie pothole region have been drained, with thousands of acres more lost each year. These pothole wetlands took tens of thousands of years to form naturally, yet in little more than a century, humans have destroyed many of them. Just wanted to list the references that I used to research this presentation. I'd like for people to share any ideas they have about where you might be able to see the courtship ceremonies of any of these grebes, or if even just their experience of what they did see, if they have seen this in past. And the one question I do have, I hope you remember, is anyone who wants to answer this, what does podiceps mean? Okay, I'm going to stop now sharing my screen.
And I'm just going to say thank you for that presentation, Lucia. That was awesome. Great photography and great information. There's a few things in there I didn't know and found really fascinating. So I'm just going to stop the recording or pause the recording so people can answer questions.